Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVMLP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org. The voice of Asheville heard all over the world and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. WalterParks.com for more on Walter's music. Davine Dial, thank you for managing WPVM-FM on Wall Street in downtown Asheville. And Robin Collier, thank you for managing KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio, coming out of Taos, New Mexico and broadcasting all the way up into Colorado. So we're glad to have both stations, and we couldn't do it without you. If you'd like to reach me, Navé at jamesnavé.com. Navé is spelled N-A-V-E. And I'd like to remind you that we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you'd like to improve your writing chops, get involved with a very active, lively community. Actually, it's an international community. We have many people on our Zoom calls from all over the world. If you'd like to learn more about that, imaginativestorm.com is where you can go to start that search. So thank you ever so much for your support. Thank you for tuning in today. I have a guest on I've known for a long time. His name is Jim Dwyer. Jim and I share something that we both love passionately, and I don't use that word all the time, but I think we can say it here. Jim he works as a slam poet. Jim is one of the well-recognized poetry performers in this country. Jim has been with us at the Leaf Poetry Slam for many years. He brings a high-energy performance to the slam. His work is complicated, and it's thoughtful, and it asks lots of strong, powerful questions about our current society, our culture, our dilemma. And Jim has agreed to just join me for a conversation around poetry, the slam, culture, life, whatever happens. So, Jim Dwyer, welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio.
Thanks for having me, Navé. Great to be here.
I really appreciate you showing up. And I would like for you to start by reflecting on how your relationship with spoken word and poetry helped you understand all of the other things that you have done throughout your life. I know some of the work that you've done. I know that you've been very, very active with people throughout your life. And I know that your skill on the stage as a performer is quite sharp. So can you reflect on how that's all married in your psychology and your interior, your atmosphere, to inform you as you move through life?
Great question. I was telling a friend of mine the other day, when I was in the 7th grade, my mother took me to see my cousin in a performance of the Cane Mutiny. I had never been to a play before. And I sat down and watched the play, and it was one of those like ding, ding, ding moments, because it was like, I thought, I want to do that. I want to be on stage. Prior to that, my whole fantasy life had involved around being a basketball star. No, not basketball, stage work. So I started to do that kind of work. I was in plays a lot in high school. And so I'd always wanted to be on stage and always been a reader, and eventually got into poetry. Lots of different things happened to me over the years. I tried to be a drunk poet for a while during my 20s. Mostly I just got drunk and didn't write much poetry. I didn't turn out to be the next Charles Bukowski. That didn't happen. There's a lot of guys out there trying to be the next Charles Bukowski. That didn't work for me. So I got sober. I had also sang in a rock and roll band in there. Like any good writer, poet, I've had a varied career doing lots of different things where I've learned a lot about all different kinds of people and the way we live together and the way we live apart. And I'm grateful for all those experiences that I've had. So some years ago, Bill Abbott, maybe you know Bill. Bill used to do the Poetry Slam in Johnson City, Tennessee. He moved to Dayton and started the Poetry Slam. I had been been trying to write and write seriously, where I work every day. I'd been doing that for a while. And when I heard about Poetry Slam and read about it, I was like, this is it. This combines my love of writing and my love of performing. And through Poetry Slam, performing not just in Dayton, but in other cities, and then having poets from all over the Midwest come to these Rust Belt regional slams that we had it tapped into my love, fascination, fear, terror, all of that with the human personality and what we are, what we're capable of, the grace and the terror that we produce. And I met so many great writers that inspired me. So performing poetry, it was just in my wheelhouse. And it really helped me to deepen my understanding of writing and also my understanding of the really almost infinite variety of human personalities and human experiences. So I guess I think I tried to answer that question.
Yeah. You mentioned what people are capable of. Could you go a little deeper into that thought? What have you learned about human capability? How have you noticed people rising to their capabilities and conversely not getting there? Some thoughts on that, please.
Sure, sure. One of the jobs that I had uh, was I worked at a psychiatric hospital for children, children and teenagers. It was in my 20s. I worked there for 10 years. And through that job, I came into contact with children who'd been abused in profound and inexplicable ways. And so I came into contact with that deep, dark side of what humans are capable of. In that job, I also came into contact with this human capacity for resilience, for courage, the human capacity for people to heal each other. One of the things that happened to me over the years is I became an alcoholic. Eventually, I got into recovery. And through the disease of alcoholism, I learned certainly a lot about my own capability for cruelty and selfishness. But in the recovery process, once again, I learned a profound amount about what humans can help each other to do when they work together. The fellowship I belong to that's helped me stay sober, it's the broken and the wounded healing the broken and the wounded. That experience changed my life. And interestingly enough, that's part of what I've heard over and over again from so many poets in their poetry is everybody's broken and wounded in some way. Writing, art is a way to try to transform that suffering into something that can help other people connect with a spirit, a strength, a courage that they maybe wouldn't necessarily have just by themselves. Every time I kind of feel despair about the human race, I also remember, and because I've had these other experiences, that right alongside all the ugliness, there's this other current running of powerful compassion and tenderness, generosity. It's so there you go, holding the two ends of the paradox together at the same time, you know?
So everybody is broken and wounded in some way, and everybody is capable, compassionate, and joyous in some way. So you have both of those going on inside, and they never really leave. That said, do you think they adjust like one might adjust sound on a soundboard when you're creating a musical recording? Bring the broken down, bring the joy up. Now let's bring the broken up and marry a little bit of joy with it and turn some compassion on and see what tune happens.
Yeah, I think life kind of does that. You know, life kind of does that for you if you're paying attention, if you're engaged with life and with other people. Those interactions kind of bring out one side or the other. I guess the trick is to be able to surf all the changes as you're going through it. Human beings have this relentless ability to bring out the best and the worst in you. At least in me, I'll say.
Well, and the process of dancing between those two states, the more broken, wounded state and the more joyous, compassionate, happy state, is something to celebrate rather than to diminish. So, in the brokenness, something rises that helps you tell a better version of your story. And you take that brokenness, alchemize it into a creative element, put that in the mix, season the story, if you will, and then off we go.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That's what we do, isn't it? We tell stories for as long as we've been around. That's what we do, and that's what poets do: tell stories. Even very abstract poetry, there's a story in there. I'm always looking for those stories, and stories can be the vehicle for that healing, for that insight. I think they always have been. When we were hunter gatherers, right? We went out and hunter gathered and did all the things we did, and then we got back together and told stories about what happened to us. As poetry slam is kind of like that. It's like a bunch of people get together and we stand up on the stage and we tell the audience stories about what's going on with us or what we're feeling, thinking. And that's one of the things I like about the idea of poetry slam is in one sense, and really any performing poetry or art in general, it's low tech. If a lot of the tech disappeared, we still could do poetry slam. We still could do poetry readings, in the same way that people sat around a campfire and told each other stories, or the poets traveled around, and Homer was a traveling poet, I suspect. And he got invited to come into the Lord's Hall and perform, the great stories about the heroes of old. And we can always do poetry. We can always tell stories. And I like that idea.
And that's a distinctly human trait. No digital space can create that. Artificial intelligence can't create that experience.
Right.
Only humans can. And I'm right now today in Taos, New Mexico. Occasionally I'll hear the coyotes howling in the evening or in the night. And of course, coyotes are everywhere. If you live in the lower 48, you probably have some coyotes in your backyard occasionally. Well, they're singing their song in the way that we sing our songs as humans. And artificial intelligence and the digital space can record that and reproduce it, but they can't make it happen from its origins. And that's what I love about this. And on that note, can you reflect a bit for us about how you go about generating your work? And I will say, when I've watched you perform on stage, you have 3 minutes to perform your poem, and a poetry slam is poems performed on stage, judged by 5 judges from the audience, scored 0 to 10 like a diving match. And the word slam comes from the grand slam in baseball. Can you hit a grand slam homer? And when you do, the audience cheers. Can you connect emotionally with your pieces so that the same thing happens when you're in front of an audience? And you do that. You move very fast when you're on stage. You have 3 minutes. You probably get 20, 30% more words into that 3 minutes than most poets do. And yet, when I've seen you do it, and I've seen you do it often, I understand every word. I'm never lost. It's not speed for the sake of speed. It's speed for the sake of the artistic presentation you make. So I'd love for you to tell us about your process. How do you generate work? Do you ever feel stuck, or is it free form for you? Then how do you go about memorizing it? Getting it up to a performance level so that you can compete on the slam stage anywhere you go. And people absolutely love what you do. I do, especially. I like to watch it happen. Here comes Jim. What's he going to do now? Can you give us some thoughts on that, please?
One of the things that I do that seems to help me generate ideas or feelings or inspiration for poems is I take long walks every day. I walk around the city. And in that process of walking, sometimes I see things or I just hear things. Some poet said, the muse gives you the first line, all the rest of them you have to come up with yourself. And I don't know which poet it was. Somebody said that. It wasn't me. I wish I said that one, but because that's pretty much true. For me, movement is really important in terms of coming up with ideas. Or when I'm working on something and I'm stuck, a lot of times when I get out on my walk, that's when I get unstuck. I talk to myself. Sometimes I'm sure people think I might be a mental health patient, having some conversations with invisible people, but because sometimes as I'm talking to myself, it comes, I say it out loud, and it's like, oh, and I walk past people and they're like, who's that? What's he doing? Anyway, but that's where how I get unstuck. So movement seems really important to me in terms of inspiration. And the other part, of course, is just the discipline of working every day. I work every day. Not all my poems are performance pieces. A lot of the poems I write are shorter and are more just kind of basic, your sort of conversational lyric poet. But I work every day, even days when nothing seems to happen too much. It seems important to me to be sitting at the laptop trying to do something. So discipline. I read somewhere, discipline comes from disciple, and disciple means learner. So discipline is learning. That's a big part of my process, is just doing it every day, sometimes twice a day. So there's that, there's movement, then there's discipline. I do meditation every day, which helps me to be more present in everything I'm doing. Paying attention, God, so much of it seems to me, so much of any artwork that one does connects with your ability to pay attention and hear, listen. A lot of what I write about is just kind of random stuff that I see and hear as I walk the streets, or as I'm just sitting in a coffee shop and I hear a phrase or something. I know, I'm not the only person. I know you do that sometimes, Navé, and I'm sure we're not the only ones. It's like, you hear something somebody said, and oh, wait, let me write that down. The more I can stay present and connected with life, to do that, I have to practice a practice that increases my ability to do that. I try not to think in terms of, will this poem be something that people will like? I try to think in terms of, does it hold together as a piece? Does it make me feel something? And then I just kind of figure if it does, then it'll get across. That's one of the things that I love about the slam, is precisely that interaction between performer or artist and audience. Anytime if you're reading poetry, there's certainly an interaction between you and the poet. But in that live setting, as you know, sometimes the energy and the connection that's created is really kind of ecstatic. There's a certain ecstasy involved. It's woo, From a biochemical standpoint, the dopamines are getting stirred up through that interaction. I try to pay attention, do practice that helps me pay attention. When I write, I try to let things happen and not censor too much, and then go back and look. And some things that seem brilliant are stupid. Am I stuck? You mentioned that. Yeah, sometimes the well seems pretty dry, but I just keep at it. I figure if I keep showing up, then I'll be there if it happens. That's kind of my idea. But I think Thomas Merton, the great priest and poet and social activist, he talked about any spiritual journey, any spiritual quest contains times when you're in the desert and you're alone and uninspired and you feel no connection. For me, that's been my experience with writing too, that there's times when it's a desert and you're just staring at the page or staring at the screen. You kind of go, maybe I shouldn't do this. But so far, I've always come back and tried to do it. So that's kind of what I guess I would say in answer to those questions.
And I walk as well and love to walk, and I will dictate when I walk and just listen for the beats to come up, the thought beats to come up. It just occurred to me when I go out for a walk, one of the things I like about being in the natural world, I'm surrounded by form, the form of the trees, the form of the lake, the form of the path, how the path curves through the woods or across the park, or the way the sidewalk is built, or the bridge I walk across. It's all about form. And as I'm walking through all of this natural form and also form that we've constructed as human beings, I'm forming my own thought patterns. And then somehow I finally get them onto the page. So when you get your work from the walk to a tight enough form so you start to put it on the page, how much attention do you pay to classic form? Is that important for you? Do you have so much experience? It just happens and the form emerges as you go along? How does form work for you, and what's your philosophy around form? And I will say before you answer that, the poetry slam is highly formed. You have 3 minutes. If you go over 3 minutes, you get a time penalty. So you have to stay within a time frame, which is a form. We in life have to stay within a time frame. We're born and we die. That's our form, and we're existing within it all the time. Thoughts on form?
Yeah, I don't pay too much attention to classic forms per se. Whitman is probably my great great grandfather. Free verse, but as you know, even with free verse, there's a form that comes out as you work through the poem. I do notice a definite. A lot of my pieces have a definite walking kind of rhythm to them, and I think that's probably what I pay most attention to is the rhythm. Wordsworth and the other romantic poets who lived up there by the lakes, and they took long, long walks and recited their poems out loud as they walked, which accounted in this one essay accounts for some of the iambic rhythm of their blank verse. The rhythmic feel of it seems more important to me.
And on that note, would you mind offering us some poetry that you've written? And I'd love to hear the performance level stuff, but I'd also like to hear some of the short stuff. And the reason I'm asking that is because people listening to this, I've been told by folks who stop me on the street and say, "Hey, I love your show." They are creative people. They're interested in how other creative people do things. And sometimes the high energy of the poetry slam discourages people. I can't do that. And I have to say, sometimes I see what you do on stage and I'm going like, I don't know how Jim does that. I've said to more than one person, watch this guy. I don't know how he keeps all that in his head. So we all somewhat stand in awe of one another. And standing in awe is really wonderful if you let it inspire you, but it could also let it hold you back a bit as well. So some short poems that are not so performance driven. And then
Sure.
I'd love to hear some samples of the longer piece that you do that I love the work. So you can pick whatever you want.
I have a whole series of poems that I just call Gem City Blues. And this is called Gem City Blues #2. Dayton is where I live, Dayton, Ohio, and Dayton is called the Gem City. So I figured if Jack Kerouac can have Mexico City Blues, I can have Gem City Blues. So here's one of those poems. Rain on my windshield, like the silent red numbers on a small digital clock, changing in the dark in a bedroom where I used to be welcome, yes, but not anymore. Rain on my windshield, like Bill Evans hunched over the piano and playing it with every cell in his body, playing it like it's funny, beautiful, sad, intoxicating, anytime, anywhere, to be anybody's Valentine. Rain on my windshield, like the February cold shivering the pine trees, like the traffic I'm leaving behind, the traffic I'm heading into, like the desert of distance between us, like this Winston I'm lighting up with the one I just smoked down to the filter. Rain on my windshield, like everything that's bent, twisted around, torn apart inside of us, all of us making deals and doing time, all of us getting loose and driving blind, all of us Jesus, all of us junkies.
Very good. I get it. It's got some duende going on. How about another?
Okay. This one's called The Road King. The Road King delivers the goods. That's what it says in fancy silver cursive on the cab of that veteran but still shiny Peterbilt, parked in a rest stop off Interstate 40 up in the mountains near Asheville, North Carolina. Unzipped in the men's room and taking a big relief piss, it occurs to me that one of my urinal brothers, all of them silent and serious and trying to stay private in public, could be the Road King himself. Surveying the scene, however, it seems unlikely. No one here looks particularly regal or imposing in any way, but then again, which of us is only who we appear to be? Disguise, after all, is the essence of identity. In the lobby, just to be sure I'm where I should be, I take a quick look at the "You Are Here" highway map hanging on the wall next to the brochures encouraging me to drive the Blue Ridge Parkway and visit the Biltmore Castle. After which I wander back towards where I saw his semi, hoping to catch a glimpse of the self-proclaimed legend. But right as I get close enough for a gander, his big truck pulls away, gears shifting past me with a roar like Godzilla, rampaging through the exploding ruins of Tokyo yet again. I watch him merge with the manic westbound traffic and wonder if there are days when he gets tired of being the road king, heavy moments when he's made wretched by the burden of his persona, the relentless self-imposed pressure of always having to deliver the goods. I know I get tired of me off and on, and I'm not the king of anything, only another wayward space-time traveler located somewhere between the two long, long silences of before and after. I start the car, put on my shades, take a deep breath, slide in the John Prine CD, and point the old Ford Focus at the setting sun. A few miles later, and I'm crying. Because John Prine, because me, because there's nowhere left to go now but home.
I love that piece, Jim. I don't know where you were. There is a Love's truck stop on I-40 in Morganton that's right at the foothills. And when you were reading that, I've stopped there many times. I saw the scene because I've been there before. I don't know if there's one further up, and I don't know the route you take when you come down from Dayton. I guess you come down 81 maybe, and through West Virginia, and then cut over.
Actually, I just come straight down 75 to Knoxville and then head east.
I'm coming
from Dayton. But I think this poem, was when I was coming from Florida. I think I came a different way. But once you get up in those mountains, there's not many rest stops. So when you get to one, it's like, let's go.
Exactly. Now, can you give us a more performance piece?
Well, I'll do this one. It's called Brave, Afraid, Alive. The river, the waterfall, the river again. God and nature grabbed the big headlines, but human beauty all by itself was more than enough to change my life. I was 13 when it happened. 13 and shooting hoops in the driveway, 13 and practicing my last second game-winning shots, 13 and dreaming of glory. An ordinary American kid killing time and wishing I was someone less ordinary on an ordinary Tuesday morning in July, and that's when I saw her. The neighbor girl, let's just call her Madeline. And she was doing these amazing backflips in her front yard, doing them one after the other, as if gravity was a personal choice instead of a natural law, as if her next trick just might be flying. In time, she felt me watching her. She stopped, looked across the street, considered her options, and whatever she meant by it, she smiled. I think I probably tried to smile back. I know I learned that day what it means to sigh. I felt brave, afraid, alive, like a road map. My heart got wise. You have to unfold it to figure out where you're going, but once you do, you never get the damn thing back into its original shape. Although after a while, that crumpled up mess does start to seem normal. The river, the waterfall, the river again. Wisdom is hard to come by. Wisdom is hard to take. Wisdom is another name for the scars on our hearts. Wisdom is 3 goldfish belly up in the bowl. The backyard is where we bury our dreams of permanence. My daughter makes a popsicle stick cross to mark the spot to honor what disappeared despite her love and vigilance. She doesn't bother asking me why suffering like this has to happen. She's 7. She already knows that I can't answer the questions that really matter. She's 7. She already knows that I think the best prayer is silence. She knows, but says a few words of benediction anyway. We both say amen. The river, the waterfall, the river again. In this part of the poem, I'm 49 years old. In this part of the poem, there's an angry woman. Let's just call her Madeline. And right now, I'm watching her get smaller and smaller as she heads down the sidewalk, climbs into her blue Dodge Neon, and pulls away from the curb. She hesitates at the stop sign for maybe 17 and a half nanoseconds. My heart flutters. We all know why, but then she hits the gas hard, burning rubber and making a sudden and absolute right turn onto North Main Street, vanishing into the rush hour traffic like a jack-in-the-box after you click the lid shut. Hope is another name for hunger. The hardest thing to see is what's right in front of your eyes. What matters most is what you turn love into when love turns on you. The river, the waterfall, the river again. The parent who dies when you're young seems like a tragic hero. The one who goes second after you're grown and finally afraid of your own death, that loss feels more like your platoon sergeant just bought it. You see it, you get it, like an eviction notice. The wheel is random, the order chaotic. The bullet that took them out could just as easily have had your name on it, but it didn't, not this time. Although any day now, it's only natural, only fair. Any day now, it will. And I was there in the room last month when my mother died, and I'm here to tell you that she died like a champion. She did it like, okay, enough is enough. This is the only part of my life that I haven't done yet, so let's get on with it. So that's what she proceeded to do. Without fear, without shame, she said her goodbyes, looked the God of everything and nothing right in the eye, let go of it all, and got lost for good. for good and forever. My mother is gone. Another name for grief is gratitude. The only name for death is death. The river, the waterfall, the river again.
Thank you. I've heard you perform that many times. It's a very insightful poem, and I'm so glad that you did that for us.
Let me just say something real quick in terms of where you get ideas. The refrain, the river, the waterfall, the river again. I saw this documentary film called The Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill. But it's a wonderful film about this homeless man who would sit for days and just watch these wild parrots and do what they do. And he eventually became like an expert on them. And a woman found out about him and made a documentary film about him and his life. And he, in the film, talks about a meditation that he learned, which is the river, the waterfall, the river again, and to meditate on those three ideas. That the river is all the time before you got here. The waterfall is all the time while you're here doing your life. And the river again is all the time that's going to be going on once you're gone. Beautiful, powerful image. I heard that and I just said, I got to do something with that. And that's what came out.
Well, you caught it, man. That's terrific. I'm glad to know that. I think that's a nice thing to know. You might add that as an opening bit of information. I don't know how you could put that in the text, but it would be really.
I'm not sure I could get that information in the 3 minutes. Maybe you never know.
I've seen you perform that piece, and you have 3 minutes, and you have 3 minutes and 20 seconds, so 20-second grace period. So I've seen you bring that under the wire. And if you get enthusiastic, I don't think you've ever gone over time, but you may have. It's one of those pieces that's really full of good stuff, and I appreciate that. On that note, I would like for you to reflect on your experience at the Leaf Poetry Slam. For people who are listening and you don't know anything about the Leaf Poetry Slam, I was involved in the Poetry Slam scene in Asheville in 1991. We had a big scene there. In 1995, I started hosting poetry slams at the Leaf Festival, and to this day, I continue to do it. We're celebrating our 30th year, so I've been at the Leaf Festival many times. I don't know how many times you've been there, and it's an old school slam. Nothing much has changed from the early days of the poetry slam, and it's a community gathering. The people love it. We have 400 people in the audience, well mic'd, with a $1,000 prize. So there's some stuff at stake. Your take on the Leaf Poetry Slam, what does it mean to you? How does it work? Give the folks a sense of your take on it.
I love the Leaf for many reasons. One reason is because it's not in a bar. A poetry slam in a bar has its own kind of energy and interest. But at the Leaf, it's in this beautiful cabin with a nice stage. And the people who come are not watching a hockey game and then looking up and seeing the poets. They're there just to participate, be a part of the experience. The people who come seem to be really hip to that notion. They clearly come to not just watch, but to put out energy and be a part of what goes on. And that's one of the reasons I love it, because people are paying attention. They're really paying attention to what you're doing. So there's that. And then the Leaf Slam, it gets a lot of its energy and its excellence from the Leaf Festival itself, from the energy and excellence of the Leaf Festival. For those of you who are listening, if you ever get a chance to go, there's two of them. There's one in the spring and one in the fall. They are wonderful experiences. People are incredibly nice and accepting. There's just it's a rainbow of people. One of the reasons I love Leaf is because I see more happy children there than I think I see anywhere else. The children there are just so happy and expressive. So the festival, it has a tremendous giving, caring, inclusive energy. It's really infectious. And so the slam gets a lot of energy from that and reflects that. So that's another reason I love going to the Leaf. All kinds of music and dance and artwork. It's wonderful. That's one of the reasons I love doing the Leaf Slam. The connections, that spirit of inclusiveness, that spirit of community, that spirit of human beings working together to make something really cool and good and human happen. That's what the Leaf is about, as I've experienced it, and that really informs the Leaf Poetry Slam.
And you have mentioned 2 or 3 times your age, 74. I will say you and I are exactly the same age, a few months apart. I'm 74. I've been involved with the Poetry Slam community, the performance poetry community, for many, many, many years. Speak to us a bit about your age and how that fits into the community, because so often in our culture we categorize ourselves. All my friends are the same age as I am. I don't know anybody who's 10 years younger. Now that's not true with everybody, but you see that age. How does it work in the poetry slam community?
Well, one of the things I've seen, of course, over the years, and I didn't start doing poetry slam until I was 49 years old. So even then, I was older than most. Some of those guys that I first met in like Columbus, like Ed Mabry and Scott Woods, I now realize they were like 20, like early 20s when I met them in the late 1990s. In fact, Scott used to call me back then, Scott used to call me Pops. So even then, it was mostly younger people, but I never experienced any sense of like any ageism. It was, what are you doing? What kind of thing are you putting out there? That was what people focused on was the artwork. From my perspective, it's mostly younger people, but I love being around younger people. I get energy and ideas, and it's good to know. And there's a general sense of it's being passed on. The thing is happening. Younger people are getting into it and finding their place. So I like the idea of not being tied in just to my boomer generation. It drives me crazy when people my age start talking about there's no good music. And you're like, what? You're crazy. There's no, things are falling. Oh, kids today. And you're like, Jesus, do you hear yourself? Don't you remember what they were saying the exact same things about us in 1968? Come on, bro. So, and one of the things that helps me to not kind of fall into that easily is poetry and art in general. It helps me to, and connecting with people who are out there and energetically creating and doing really fine work at 22, 23, 4, 25 years old. I have children and grandchildren who also help me to not get into, grumpy old man territory.
Well, the creative act is eternally young, no matter how old you are when you participate in it. So if I'm making a poem, I don't think about the years or anything else. If I'm recording a sound file like this show we're recording right now, this interview, it's eternally young because we are creating something that did not exist before we came together. This is brand spanking new. And the newness within the context of the universal creation is what keeps us all in a certain kind of vitality that can't be measured by time or age or any of our other human measures. It's just us in the moment. And that's what I've always liked about the poetry slam. If you want to participate, you go to the bar, you sign your name, and you're on the stage. If you get there before the list fills up, you can get on the stage. There's a bit of a limitation. If you come late, you can't, but you come next week and you can. So that's what I like about this. And there's a democratic acceptance.
Those two words, democratic acceptance, that's beautiful. I think that's certainly one of the things that's always appealed to me about Poetry Slam. It is a non-elitist event. Democratic, that word, and what we're going through right now in America, democracy is under threat for sure. In any place where we can have experiences of what a democracy produces when it's working well is a good thing.
And it is interesting because the poetry slam marries a bit of the conservative and liberal philosophy at the door. I'd not thought about that till just now. The conservative point of view is you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you do it all alone without anybody's help. John Wayne did it, you can too. Now, there's some truth to that because when you're on the horse, you are up there with just you and the horse, and you do have to keep yourself upright. And when you're performing your poems or when you're generating your work, you are doing it alone. Conversely, the more liberal point of view, the door is wide open for anybody who walks through. Pair those two. You can walk through the door at a poetry slam, and no matter who you are, where you come from, if you are at the right age. I mean, I imagine a baby could do it, but somebody that's at an adult slam, everybody over 18 gets to sign up. You sign up and nobody questions you. You're free to go in and present your work on the stage. And then the more conservative point of view of pulling yourself up to the stage, you stand up all alone and you do your thing. And you're free and sovereign within your own power base. So it's a combination of both of those ideas at the same time. And that's a democratic nuance that I hadn't thought of until just now.
And I think, isn't that true? In one sense, it's kind of true about any artistic endeavor. You're doing it alone, in one sense. Mm-hmm. You're sitting at the typewriter or you got your guitar, or whatever you're doing. But in another sense, you're always standing on the shoulders of giants. You're always, even in a poetry slam, the best poetry slams that I've ever been involved in, you're on stage. And when you're on stage, it's just you. But backstage, there's a lot of good. When the poetry slam is good, there's a lot of encouragement and connection between the poets of like, yeah, man, and high fives and way to go and pats on the back that really help you to do what you do when you get on stage. It is this combination of community and individuality, and not either or, both and. And I think that's kind of what we're facing culturally right now. Is there's one part of our culture that wants to go either or, black and white, and there's another part of our culture that wants to go both and. I'm a both and kind of guy.
I'm in the same place. I'm both and as well. I'm not wired up to exclude a lot of people. Now, I am wired up to have discernment. I do know what I like and what I don't like.
Right.
I'm not going to hold my opinion against you if you're doing something different. We can exist together in a bit of harmony and agreement. And again, that's what I like about the Poetry Slam in general. That's what I most especially like about the Leaf Poetry Slam and Leaf across the board, the Leaf Global Arts, the Leaf Festival. You mentioned the cabin. That cabin is Lake Eden Hall. It's actually a hall, but it looks like a cabin. It was built in 1923 or something. It's still there. And in fact, the people who now own Camp Rockmont, where the festival is held, which is the former campus of Black Mountain College, they just renovated Eden Hall this year, and it's fully up to speed now. So there's a lot going on. On that note, anything you'd like to say for us in closing, Jim, before we say goodbye?
Just thank you for having me. It's really been fun talking. And if you're out there trying to work, keep working, man. Keep working. Don't let failure be a problem for you. Failure is a necessary part of any creative activity. It's been really good. Been really good.
Thank you so much, Jim. I really appreciate it. And there you go, my friends. Thus concludes my conversation with Jim Dwyer from Dayton, Ohio. I'm looking forward to seeing Jim's work once again on the Leaf Poetry Slam stage in October 2024, as I've seen it many times before, which of course you already know because you just listened to this interview. And during the interview, Jim and I talked about how do you connect with your writing? How do you connect with your voice? What does it mean? And usually when I finish the interviews, I have some commentary, which I generally create without a script, just things that stay on the subject of what we've been talking about, or something I think is worthwhile exploring. So today, instead of just talking, I'd like to read an essay I wrote about finding your voice. It was published on the Imaginative Storm Substack last week, and since Jim and I were talking about finding things, writing about things, I'd like to read it for you now just so you can get a sense of my take on how you find your voice, and the piece is titled, Do You Need to Find Your Voice? A few weeks ago, I received an email from one of our Imaginative Storm writers. Here's what she wrote. Quote, You mentioned finding our voice on one of your podcasts. Can you tell me more? What does that mean to you, and how do you do it? How do I do it? Does it change with time? I'm working with a lady who is trying to find her voice. She was hushed most of her life. In therapy, we explore where that came from, but more so, how she can find her voice now and how to use it. It's hard for her, scary. I understand. My life was similar. Close quotes. I loved her question because I'd been thinking a great deal about the idea that our voices don't actually get lost, but rather stifled or muffled by circumstances and other people. I've concluded that it might be more accurate to say, rather than finding your voice, perhaps it's about freeing it, or even recognizing that your voice is searching for you as much as you're searching for it. Hasn't your voice been with you since you were born? The only way to lose your spoken voice is to lose your vocal cords, and even then, you retain the essence of you, even in silence. You might say, you are your voice, and you will never lose your voice until the day you die. Writers often talk about needing to find their voice. Here's my take on that. This writerly problem can be a way of avoiding a more profound need, perhaps courage to write without fear of criticism, or confidence to express yourself with vulnerability, or just the basic human need to feel creative. So when someone tells you they need to find their voice, you might say to them, fair enough, but consider this. Because you haven't actually lost your voice, it's been with you all along, what else do you need to find? When you accept that you never lost your voice, you can focus on what's really holding you back from saying whatever you need to say. Here are a dozen things to remember when you think you need to find your voice. 1. There's no need to search for your voice. You already have it. 2. Confidence in your writing voice comes from practice, not pursuit. 3. Finding your voice is like trying to find love. It appears when you stop searching. 4. Writing well isn't about form, but letting your voice dance on the page. 5. When you write to explore, not to impress, your voice will shine. 6. Give up perfectionism. Your authentic voice isn't perfect, it's personal. 7. Writing longhand keeps your voice messy and real. 8. Dictate while you walk because movement frees your voice. 9. Explore your voice through small daily writings. Practice makes it authentic. 10. Don't let past teachers' voices drown out your writing. 11. Write like you talk. Your natural voice is in your spoken words. Number 12. Be playful with your words. Your voice loves to play. So now you have 12 tips you can use about finding your voice. I hope you found them useful. Ultimately, the challenge is not to find your voice, but to embrace your voice without hesitation, to let it speak with the authenticity and confidence that comes from being yourself. Writing is a process of uncovering. In that uncovering, you'll discover that your voice may have been stifled or mislaid, but it was never truly lost. So that's the end of the first part of the essay about finding your voice. Now I would like to read the second part, a little shorter, about artificial intelligence and how that worked with this essay. I've been using ChatGPT-4 for almost 2 years now. So here's how I used it to help me organize this essay. I use it ethically as an assistant, not as a creator. So here's what happened. In creating this essay, I went on a morning walk around Beaver Lake, and on that walk, I walked for about an hour, and in that hour, I dictated about 6,000 words into my notes on my iPhone. When I walk and I dictate, I think of it as research. It's certainly not the final product. So after I dictated it, I had the text on my notes in my iPhone. I downloaded it to my computer. I organized it verbatim, and then I took the verbatim text and instructed ChatGPT-4 to extract 50 pithy quotes from the text without altering any of my words in any way, and then I chose the favorites from that 50 and combined them and ended up with the 12 that I included in the essay. I find the best way to use artificial intelligence in creative work is for organizational tasks. If you get good ideas while walking and dictating, artificial intelligence can transcribe and pull out the main points so that you don't have to wade through mountains of paper speckled with ums and half sentences and digressions. I also use it for finding compatible colors, evaluating a social media post and suggesting hashtags, and organizing quotes alphabetically by author. Artificial intelligence is a tool, not a substitute for original thinking or writing. Giving it the right instructions is the key. So I encourage you to play around with it and find out how it might save you time and trouble. And when you're giving artificial intelligence instructions, when you want to keep it very accurate to your voice, remember to include the instruction without changing any of my words. And that's the end of the essay that I posted on Substack. I think it's important to say here that I've been working with ChatGPT-4 since it came out about 2 years ago, and it's taken me a bit of time to figure out how to give it those instructions that I'm now talking about. And it will surprise you when you start to use it. Here's a good example of a surprise. I'll close with this. Jennifer Pickering and I are working on a book about Leaf Global Arts. It's a book that will give an overview of the last 30 years of the project. Jennifer told me and sent me to the link that led me to the database that had all of the testimonials starting in 2018 through 2024. And they were on a database, on a spreadsheet, and she wanted me to go through each testimonial, add the name, and add the testimonial, put them together. And so I started to do it, and I went through a half year, 2018. It took me 3 hours to do it. And then I thought, what if I just copied the entire document with the testimonials attached to the names, gave ChatGPT-4 this instruction: take this information, arrange it in alphabetical order with the name and all of the testimonial that goes with the name, and do not change anything. Give it to me verbatim. So I dropped the first year in, and sure enough, within less than a minute, it came back, ChatGPT-4 came back with the testimonials and the names in alphabetical order with nothing changed. It took me maybe 15 minutes to organize each year. So the tasks that would have taken me a week to do, I was able to do in about 3 hours. So that's a good example of how ChatGPT-4 and artificial intelligence recently surprised me. So I also want to say that I understand all of the implications of machine deep learning and how this business of using AI in all of our work is dramatically unpredictable. I understand that. Even so, it's here and it's available for you to use, for me to use, for all of us to use if we so choose. So we have to be careful not to let it be an authority. It becomes an assistant. It can help with lots and lots and lots of things, especially organization. It can also give you hex codes to go with the color midnight blue. Give me 25 compatible hex colors that will complement midnight blue, and you can get that. So there are many, many things you can do with it. Many, many things you can do with your life, and much, much awaits us. So I like to stay optimistic, even though sometimes a lot of stuff going on in the world, and we don't know what will happen next. But what I do know is that I will be back for the next Twice 5 Miles radio show. And I also know that right now I've arrived at the close. So whether I like it or not, I'm going to have to say thank you ever so much for listening to Twice 5 Miles radio and all of this discussion around Leaf Slam and what Jim had to say and artificial intelligence and all of the rest. So thank you very, very much for listening, as I said, to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVMLP, Asheville 103.7, streaming online, WPVMFM.org. the voice of Asheville heard all over the world and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio coming out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. WalterParks.com for more on Walter's music. Thank you, Jim Dwyer, for managing WPVM-FM on Wall Street in downtown Asheville, and Robin Collier for managing KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio, out of Taos, New Mexico, going up into Colorado. You can always reach me, Navé, at jamesnavé.com. I would love to hear from you. And I would like to remind you that we are sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. It's something that I've been working on for a long time, and I'm glad that the organization that I work with, Imaginative Storm, can sponsor this show. We are having a community gathering on October the 7th at Taos Lifestyle in downtown Taos, 6 p.m. on a Monday evening. It's a salon. It's a conversation. We will be talking about the Imaginative Storm. It's a way of just introducing some of these ideas to folks. And since this is community radio and you are listening, maybe if you're in Taos, you can gather in person and we can listen to each other collectively in the room. It should be a good evening. So if you'd like to know more about that, you can always email me, Navé at jamesnavé.com. Taos Lifestyle, it's in the middle of Taos, and we look forward to doing that with you and hope you can make it to our little community gathering. So on that note, once again, thanks so much for listening. Do come back sometime soon, and until then, maybe I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.